Welcome back. This video is going to cover one of the toughest bits of scripture maybe in the Bible, and that's going to be Romans 9:19 through 29. If you go ahead and just start with verse 1 of chapter 9, though, so you can get the full context and flow, and kind of remind yourself of what the previous video went over, and take a pause to do that and come back. All right, so let's dig into this. Before we even get going, this is going to be kind of in some ways, it's an outlier passage. Part of it is because where this fits in Paul's overall argument for Romans is he's trying to show God is in no way unjust. In no way of interpreting or reading the situation is God outside of his rights. He is, after all, God. That uh, anything he did within these bounds, he is fair and he is just, and he's going to be. That is what's most important to him. Is like nothing shall be taken away from the justice of God. It's like God doesn't have to do any of the good things he does, and that's what he's trying to prove right here, except for out of his goodness. But when he starts giving grace, it is the glory that it's sort of like so that you get the full marvel of God's grace here is that when God does do amazing things and he does save and he does reach out and he does include, it's so that the marvel of that, the amazingness of that, the sort of overkill of that is that much more amazing. It's all the entire purpose is eventually to point back to worshiping God. It's not to make God look in human terms like an ogre. First of all, you're trying to say if God does it, he's not an ogre, he's well in his rights, but he doesn't exercise those rights. He goes to the fullness of his glory. But this is kind of cover that. Now, to build your entire theology over the sort of what is the theological worst case scenario for Paul might be a problem. And I think that's probably one of my biggest problems with Calvin is that and over formulation. It's like putting this losing this in track of the argument and kind of taking it out of context and playing it off other parts of the Bible. But the hard truths in it stay the hard truths. So the problem with Calvinism isn't that God wouldn't be in his rights to do this or that we deserve better or anything. It's like the truth that we don't really deserve much good at all is that's very much central to what he's doing there. And that God can be free to do what he would want with regard to us is definitely in there as well. So we're going to delve into this, but do remember this is sort of like the rock bottom, but it is still like that rock bottom is still a foundation of the whole thing. So let's see if we can untangle this. So we left off looking at the idea that Jacob had loved, Esau had hated. That he ended kind of the last one, trying to say that physical descent isn't necessary for how the promise moved. And then you might doubt that, like, wait, so he's just picking people at random? That's not very fair. That invites a sort of besmirching of God's character. So let's look at this. What shall we say there? Is there injustice on God's part? And he says, by no means. No, absolutely not. He is not just. And he says, first off, he says to Moses, of mercy on whom I have mercy, and of compassion on whom I have compassion. It's on him to give mercy. It's his possession to give out. Compassion is his possession to give out. Now, the truth is, as we'll see, God gives mercy all over the place. He gives compassion all over the place. But when he doesn't, it isn't really an injustice on him. The people that are getting a punishment, I guess you could say, are getting things they picked. Remember, like the punishment for sin is being allowed in your sin way back in Romans 1. So then it depends not on human will or exertion. It's not trying harder, but on God who has mercy. So it's not what we do that gives us mercy. It's what God did that has us mercy. So Jacob did nothing to have this mercy of being the father of Israel. God just had the mercy. It was on him. For Scripture says to Pharaoh, for this very purpose, this is Pharaoh in the context of the Exodus, for this very purpose I've raised you up that may show my power in you, that my name may be proclaimed to the earth. So then he'll have mercy on his mercy and on whoever he wills and hardens whoever he wills. Talking about like the other kind of, besides Jacob I love, Esau hated, Pharaoh is the other kind of big example because in Pharaoh, it says he hardened Pharaoh's heart so that God's purposes can be shown. Now, one of the things we must always remember with Pharaoh, and this is true for anybody that you'd say hardened their heart, Pharaoh's reverting to Pharaoh when Pharaoh's heart is hardened. When Pharaoh's heart's hardened, he's hardened to do what he already wanted to do more. Pharaoh wanted to oppress. Pharaoh wanted slaves. And the softness of the heart that would make him be not true to himself was taken away. That is who he really was. He was worshiping himself. Which is again kind of the punishments that we saw back in Romans 1, the sort of moral failures we had in Romans 1. When you serve the creation instead of the creator, you miss the creator and you become more like that. And the punishment of that is he turns you over to that. You get what you said you wanted is usually the way the punishment works. Pharaoh wanted to be a tyrant, and he got being a tyrant. So, but when God shows mercy, he brings you out of that hardness. So, um, you will say to me then, why does he still find fault? Who can resist his will? So this is economists would call this irresistible grace. Uh, who can find fault with this person? It's not Pharaoh didn't really have a choice, no matter what it looks like. But who are you, O man, to answer back to God? And so again, here's the sort of ultimate rock bottom, but it's also like the spot where once we realize it is supposed to be the root of all gratitude. It's supposed to be if this gives you anything other than humility, you did it wrong. It is supposed to be the most humbling of truths. If it puffs up, if it makes you feel big about yourself, if it makes you feel special versus your neighbor, you did it wrong. That's the point. And so do always remember this when you get there. So it says, who are you, O man, to speak back to God? What is the molded to say to the molder? Why have you made me like this? Why does if you were a pot, you don't get to say to the pot maker, why'd you make me this way? If it wasn't for the pot maker, you're just a lump of clay. You're a nothing. You don't exist. Has the potter no right over the clay to make out of the same lump one vessel for honorable use, another for dishonorable? So picture one pot, a lump of clay, where the pot maker is like, okay, I'm gonna make something nice out of this thing, and he makes like a mean boss level ornamental vase, something beautiful that will have value for centuries. And then with the rest of the clay, is like, I'll make a little ashtray, or I'll make a chamber pot. And I think actually for honorable and dishonorable use, he's thinking like a chamber pot. So it says, uh, does the clay have any say in that matter? Well, what if God, desiring to show his wrath, to make known his power, what if, I think if you miss the if, you miss the point. If Paul says if, we should take him at his word. Some of the interpretations that mess up here think Paul is revealing something when he's saying if. Sometimes when Paul says if, he's revealing he doesn't necessarily know. You're putting words in his mouth if you say more, and those words aren't necessarily part of the inspired words of God. The if is in it. So the if is we take him as word that he doesn't know this. And we'll have several of these. Paul isn't straight giving the answers to some of the problems he's addressing here. He's giving you, he's like, it's this or this or this, and so this is the way I'm going to behave, and I think this is the right way to behave under the Spirit. That's what he comes up with. But the knowledge of exactly how it works isn't for him. And so this is going to be a thing that stays in a role of mystery that we don't always get to know how it works. So it says, what if God, desiring to show us his wrath and to make known his power, has endured with much patience vessels of wrath prepared for destruction? What if he made people just to show as a warning of what not to do? That's kind of, he says if. But this is the origin of what's sometimes called double predestination. Now that God had chosen to save, but that had also chosen some to be damned. The fancy theological word for that is a reprobate. I don't know why. You need a fancy word for that. But what if he had designed some for destruction? It doesn't say he designed some for destruction. He says, what if? That is in God's rights. So if we're better than that, we're already happy. That's is again meant to be a fountain of gratitude, but also like a fountain of humility. We're trying to figure out exactly how God's keeping his promises with regard to Israel. That's the overall argument and point of it. So, what if that the rejection of Jesus by the Jewish people then was meant to be a don't do that, but others are saved, and this is not meant to turn into anti-Semitism of any sort. It's that exact audience that Paul is dealing with that rejected Jesus. And he says, what if the rejection is so that God could show it? Not in any kind of race way, but in a, oh, if they missed it, holy crap, I could have missed it because they were raised to know it right, and I wasn't. And so the grace gets to be shown off even more. But the whole thing hinges on those two letters, if. He doesn't say it. He says if. So what if they're there? He doesn't know. This is one plausible possibility for how the promises are going to be working. That it doesn't go through bodily descent, the promises. And those that doesn't might be there so that God can say, this is what not to do. Maybe. This is worst case scenario, and he'll build on it. In order to make known the riches of his glory for vessels of mercy. So it's like, I'm glad I'm not that, but God is so good. I could have been that, which he prepared beforehand for glory. Even us whom he called, not from the Jews only, but also for the Gentiles. So it's like, and again, it's the whole thing's supposed to be humility for Jews and Gentiles alike, not to be puffed up. We see this applied in how the church is supposed to be living in the end of Romans in chapters 12, 13, and 14, especially. If you're puffed up, you're doing it wrong. There's no pride in this. So their arguments are inane. They're stupid. It's like you're a vessel of mercy. You're not a vessel of merit. Stop acting like you deserve it. Be humble and love your brother and do it right. So it says, as indeed it says in Hosea, and that is in 2:23. Those who are not my people, I will call my people. To her who was not beloved, I will call beloved. And also in Hosea 1:10, and in the very place where it was said to them, "You're not my people," they'll be called sons of the living God. And Hosea is an amazing little book to kind of see a picture of grace, where the prophet Hosea is told to marry a woman who's going to cheat and cheat and cheat and cheat on him, and their relationship becomes a picture of Israel and God, and that she has no merit for Hosea coming back and loving her again and again and again. Just like Israel has no merit for God loving him again and again and again. But that also says those who are not my people can be my people. That his love can go on. And that this is going to be the beginning of, for what Paul sees as Abraham becoming a blessing to all the nations. This is the sort of actual destiny for the whole thing. And Isaiah cries out concerning Israel, though the numbers of the sons of Israel be as the sand of the sea, only a remnant will be saved. And he's saying, though there's a ton of them, only a small group gets saved. And we'll see that explored later in chapter 11, so we'll save that for then. For the Lord will carry out his sentence upon the earth fully and without delay. And as Isaiah predicted, if the Lord of hosts had not left his offspring, we would have been like Sodom and become like Gomorrah. That there were times in Israel's history they were nigh wiped out, and but some were saved. But it's like for Paul, it's like if some are flocking to the Messiah and others aren't, maybe we're in another one of those times where only some are saved. And so he's trying to figure out what does that mean for the promises, and that's where he's grappling with it. For Paul, this is the most pressing issue. For a lot of Christians today, this is a historical issue or something people kind of take out of context to kind of become their pet peeve. All right, so we'll have that. That's wrapped up there, and I hope that was all right. I hope that answered questions. That's all I got for now. Thanks.